Hello, everybody. What's happening? Hey, thanks for the lurk, Aqua. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, we're... Oh, thank you. Thanks for the follow. Startles me every time because I always forget. I'll put the chat back on so it'll pop up on screen. I always forget that I have it set to the Jurassic Park, so all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, Jurassic Park? Hey, kitties. What's up? Just in time. Gonna read another Edgar Allan Poe story from my awesome hardcover greatest works of Edgar Allan Poe after I close my door, because the dogs are gonna bark because I just knocked on the book. Give me 1 second. So that's fun. All right. Can you hear me? I hope so. Now I'm going to start the music in the background. Hopefully that'll be okay. Let me know how it sounds. If it's too loud, if it needs to be turned down, turned up, just let me know. I'll give it a second while I talk so that this way... Damn, it's loud as shit in my headphones, though. Whew. This way, it won't drown out me reading. I just kind of want, like, background ambient music. How does it sound? Everything sound good so far? Yeah, I figured, as I said in the last Reedy Reads, be doing a little bit of old-timey reading that's in the public domain now. Anything written before 1923 is now in the public domain, and it's free to use as you want. Some of these stories by Edgar Allan Poe I have never read. Last time I read Cask of Amontillado, which is one of my absolute favorites that he has written, or wrote, because he is long dead. But this book is pretty great. There's poems, and tales, essays and criticisms, and letters. It's all published in here. It's a pretty nice little book. I guess we'll get started in a minute. The music's still, it's not drowning me out or anything. God, it's still so loud in my headphones, though. Jeez. Alright. That's a little better. Everything is fine. Alright, so today we're gonna read. Let's see if I can get that. Fall of the House of Usher. Why am I having trouble with this? See? I can't get it to sit right. Got this fancy little ribbon book placeholder. An outstanding work of American Gothic literature, this gruesome short story, narrated by an unnamed narrator, was published in Burton's Gentleman's Magazine in September 1839. I'm a little off screen here. Let's tilt my camera down a little. There's something written in, I think it's French, and I don't know how important it is to the story, but yikes. I'll try to read it. I'm not a linguist. San cor est un luth suspendu citat quan le touch il ressonne by De Barringer. No idea what that means. If anybody wants to try to translate that, you know what? I'm gonna put it in the chat. Oop. Sorry. So this way, if anybody wants to translate it for me, or tell me how badly I butchered the pronunciation of all of the letters, I mean words, letters, words, you know. Suspendu. I'll put the quotes on then, this way. Boop. There you go. Enjoy that. Hopefully somebody can read it. I couldn't do the little accents and stuff. I can't remember how to do them on the computer. But let's get to the story. During the whole of a dull, dark, and soundless day in the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singularly dreary tract of country, and at length found myself, as the shades of the evening drew on, within view of the melancholy house of Usher. I know not how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. I say insufferable, for the feeling was unrelieved by any of that half pleasurable, because poetic sentiment with which the mind usually receives even the sternest natural images of the desolate or terrible. I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house and the simple landscape features of the domain, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant eye-like windows, upon a few rank sedges, and upon a few white trunks of decayed trees, with an utter depression of soul which I compare to no earthly sensation more properly than to the after dream of the reveler upon opium, the bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off of the veil. There was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart, an unredeemed dreariness of thought which no goading of the imagination could torture into aught of the sublime. What was it, I paused to think, what was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the house of Usher? It was a mystery all insoluble, nor could I grapple with the shadowy fancies that crowded upon me as I pondered. I was forced to fall back upon the unsatisfactory conclusion that while, beyond doubt, there are combinations of very simple natural objects which I have the power of thus affecting us, still the analysis of the power lies among considerations beyond our depth. It was possible, I reflected, that a mere different arrangement of the particulars of the scene, of the details of the picture, would be sufficient to modify, or perhaps to annihilate its capacity for sorrowful impression. And acting upon this idea, I reined my horse to the precipitous brink of a black and lurid tarn that lay in unruffled luster by the dwelling. I gazed down, but with a shudder even more thrilling than before, upon the remodeled and inverted images of the gray sedge, and the ghastly tree stems, and the vacant and eye-like windows. Oh, thank you for the gifted sub, kitties. Nevertheless, in the mansion of gloom, I now propose to myself a sojourn of some weeks. Its proprietor, Roderick Usher, had been one of my boon companions in boyhood, but many years had elapsed since our last meeting. A letter, however, had lately reached me in a distant part of the country, a letter from him which, in its wildly importunate nature, had admitted of no other than a personal reply. The MS gave evidence of nervous agitation. The writer spoke of acute bodily illness, of a mental disorder which oppressed him, and and of an earnest desire to see me at his best, and indeed his only personal friend, with a view of attempting, by what cheerfulness of my society, some alleviation of his malady. It was the manner in which all this and much more was said. It is the apparent heart that went with the request, which allowed me no room for hesitation, and I accordingly obeyed forthwith what I still considered a very singular summons. Although as boys we had been even intimate associates, yet I knew little of my friend. His reserve had been always excessive and habitual. I was aware, however, that his very ancient family had been noted, time out of mind, with a peculiar sensibility of temperament, displaying itself through long ages in many works of exalted art, and manifested, of late, in repeated deeds of munificent yet unobtrusive charity, as well as a passionate devotion to the intricacies, perhaps even more than to the orthodox and easily recognizable beauties of musical science. I had learned, too, that the very remarkable fact of the stem of the house of the Usher race, all time-honored as it was, had put forth at no period an enduring branch. In other words, that the entire family lay in the direct line of descent, and had always, with very trifling and very temporary variation, so lain. It was this deficiency I considered while running over in thought the perfect keeping of the character of the premises with the accredited character of the people, and while speculating upon the possible influence which the one, in the long lapse of centuries, might have exercised upon the other. It was this deficiency, perhaps, of collateral issue, and the consequent undeviating transmission from sire to son of the patrimony with its name, which had at length so identified the two as to merge the original title of the estate in the quaint and equivocal appellation of the House of Usher, an appellation which seemed to include in the minds of the peasantry who used it both the family and the family mansion. I'm not going to lie, this story is really hard to read. There are a lot of words that I am very not familiar with, just like in the last story, but there's even more in this one. Hold on, let me put my little bookmark at the end of the story so I know how much more I have to give. All right. Continuing on. I have said that the sole effect of my somewhat childish experiment, that of looking down with the tarn, had been to deepen the first singular impression. There can be no doubt that with the consciousness of the rapid increase of my superstition, for why should I not so term it, served mainly to accelerate the increase itself. Such, I have long known, is the paradoxical law of all sentiment, having terror as a basis. It might have been for this reason only that, when I uplifted my eyes to the house itself from its imagery in the pool, that grew in my mind a strange fancy, a fancy so ridiculous indeed that I but mention it to show the vivid force of the sensation which oppressed me. I had so worked upon my imagination as really to believe that about the whole mansion and domain there hung an atmosphere peculiar to themselves and their immediate vicinity, an atmosphere which had no affinity with the air of heavens, but which reeked up from the decayed trees and the gray wall and the silent tarn, a pestilent and mystic vapor, dull, sluggish, faintly discernible, and leaden-hued. Shaking off my spirit what must have been a dream, I scanned more narrowly the real aspect of the building. Its principal feature, which seemed to be of an excessive antiquity, the discoloration of ages had been great. Minute fungi overspread the whole exterior, hanging in a fine tangled webwork of the eaves. Yet all this was apart from an extraordinary dilapidation. No portion of the masonry had fallen, and there appeared to be a wild inconsistency between its still perfect adaptation of parts and the crumbling condition of the individual stones. In this there was much that reminded me of the specious totality of old woodwork which rotted for long years in some neglected vault, with no disturbance from the breath of the external air. Beyond this, the indication of excessive decay, however, the fabric gave little token of instability. Perhaps the eye of a scrutinizing observer might have discovered a barely perceivable fissure, which extended from the roof of the building in front, made its way down the wall in a zigzagging direction until it became lost in the sudden waters of the tarn. Noticing these things, I rode over a short causeway to the house, A servant in the sorry. A servant in waiting took my horse, and I entered the Gothic archway of the hall. A valet of stealthy step thence conducted me in silence through many dark and intricate passages in my progress to the studio of his master. Much that I encouraged on the way contributed, I know not how, to heighten the vague sentiment of which I have already spoken, while objects around me, while the carvings of the ceiling, the somber tapestry in the walls, the ebon blackness on the floors, and the phantasmagoric armorial trophies which rattled as I strode, were but matters to which, or were but matters to which, or to such as which, I had been accustomed from my infancy. While I hesitated not to acknowledge how familiar was all this, I wondered how to find unfamiliar were the fancies which ordinary images were stirring up. On one of the staircases I met the physician of the family. His countenance, I thought, wore a mingling expression of low cunning and perplexity. He accosted me with trepidation and passed on. The valet now threw open a door and ushered me into the presence of its master. I gotta turn the music down again. My headset, it's very loud. Okay. The room in which I found myself was large and lofty. The windows were long, narrow, and pointed, and at so vast a distance from the great black oaken floor as to be altogether inaccessible from within. Feeble gleams of encrimsoned light made their way through the trellised panes and served to render sufficiently distinct the more prominent objects around. The eye, however, struggled in vain to reach the remoter angles of the chamber, or the recesses of the vaulted and fretted ceilings. Dark draperies hung upon the walls. The general furniture was profuse, comfortless, antique, and all tattered. Many books and musical instruments lay scattered about, but failed to give any vitality to the scene. I felt that I breathed an atmosphere of sorrow. An air of stern, deep, irredeemable gloom hung over and pervaded all. Upon my entrance, Usher rose from a sofa on which he had been lying at full length, and greeted me with a vivacious warmth which had much in it. I, at first thought of an overdone I'm having so much trouble here. Cordiality of the constrained effort of the inane man of the world. A glance, however, at his countenance convinced me of his perfect sincerity. We sat down, and for some moments, while he spoke not, I gazed upon him with a feeling of half pity and half awe. Surely man had never before so terribly altered in so brief a period as Roderick Usher. It was with difficulty that I could bring myself to admit the identity of the wan being before me with the companion of my earlier boyhood. Yet the character of his face had been at all times remarkable. A cadaverous of complexion, a large eye liquid and luminous beyond comparison, lips somewhat thin and very pallid, but of a surpassingly beautiful curve, a nose of a delicate Hebrew model, but with the breadth of nostril unusual in similar formations, a finely molded chin speaking in its want of prominence, of a want of moral energy, hair of a more than web-like softness and tenuity. These features, with an inordinate expansion above the regions of the temple, made up altogether a countenance not so easy to be forgotten. And now with the and now in the mere exaggeration of the prevailing character of these features and of the expression they were wont to convey, lay so much of change that I doubted to whom I spoke. The now ghastly pallor of the skin and the now miraculous luster of his eye, above all things, startled and even awed me. The silken hair, too, had been suffered to grow all unheeded, and as in its wild gossamer texture, it floated rather than fell upon the face. I need to sit up more. Right, let me slide my chair in. I could not, even with effort, connect its arabesque expression with any idea of simple humanity. Oh boy, this is a longer story. In the manner of my friend, I was at once struck with an incoherence and inconsistency, and soon I found this to arise from a series of feeble, futile struggles to overcome a habitual trepidancy and an excessive nervous agitation. For something of this nature I had been prepared, no less by his letter than by reminiscence of certain boyish traits, and by conclusions deduced from his peculiar physical conformation and temperament. His action was alternatively vivacious and sullen. His voice varied rapidly from a tremulous indecision when the animal spirits seemed utterly in abeyance, to the species of energetic concision, that abrupt, weighty, unhurried, and hollow-sounding enunciation, that laden, self-balanced, and perfectly modulated guttural utterance, which must be observed. Oh my god, the frickin' sounds in the music scared the piss out of me. I thought someone was behind me. Which may be observed in the lost drunkard or the irreclaimable eater of opium during the periods of the most intense excitement. Yeah, right? All of a sudden I heard like the breathing and I was like, what the... It was thus that he spoke of the object of my visit, of his earnest desire to see me, and of the solace he expected me to afford him. He entered at some length into what he conceived to be the nature of his malady. It was, he said, a constitutional and family evil, and one for which he despaired to find a remedy. A mere nervous affliction, he immediately added. I just lost my spot. He immediately added, which would undoubtedly soon pass off. It displayed itself in a host of unnatural sensations. Some of these, as he detailed them, interested and bewildered me, although perhaps the terms and general manner of the narration had lost their weight. He had suffered much from a morbid acuteness of the senses. The most insipid food was alone endurable. He could only wear garments of certain texture. The odors of all flowers were oppressive. His eyes were tortured by even a faint light, and there were but peculiar sounds, and from these stringed instruments, which did not inspire him with horror. Relatable. To the anomalous species of terror I found him with a bounden slave. I shall perish, he said. I must perish in this deplorable folly. Thus, and not otherwise, shall I be lost. I dread the events of the future, not in themselves, but in their result. I shudder at the thought of any, even the most trivial incident, which may operate upon this intolerable agitation of my soul. I have, indeed, no arborance of danger except in its absolute effect in terror. In this unnerved, in this pitiable condition, I feel that the period will sooner or later arrive when I must abandon life and reason together, in some struggle with the grim phantasm, fear. I learned, moreover, at intervals, and through broken and equivocal hints, another singular feature of his mental condition. He was enchained by certain superstitious impressions in regard to the dwelling which he tenanted, and whence for many years he had never ventured forth, in regard to an influence whose superstitious force was conveyed in terms too shadowy here to be restated, an influence which some peculiarities in the mere form and substance of the family mansion had, by dint of long sufferance, he said, obtained over his spirit, an effect which the physique of the grey walls and turrets and of the dim tarn into which they all looked down had at length brought upon the morale of his existence. That was all one sentence. There's very long sentences, so it's hard to come up with a speaking pause in it. Let me take a sip of coffee. Got my Nightmare Before Christmas mug. Oh, thank you. It is a great mug. A very great mug. All right. Where were we? He admitted, however, although with hesitation, that much of the peculiar gloom which thus afflicted him could be traced to a more natural and far more palpable origin, to the severe and long-continued illness, indeed to the evidently approaching dissolution of a tenderly beloved sister, his sole companion for years, his last and only relative on earth. Her decease, he said with a bitterness which I could never forget, would leave him with the hopeless and the frail, the last of the ancient race of the Ushers. While he spoke, Lady Madeline, for so she was called, passed slowly through a remote portion of the apartment, and, without having noticed my presence, disappeared. I regarded her with an utter astonishment, not unmingled with dread. Yet I found it impossible to account for such feelings. A sensation of stupor oppressed me, and my eyes followed her retreating steps. When a door at length closed upon her, my glance sought indistinctly and eagerly the countenance of the brother. But he had buried his face in his hands, and I could only perceive that a far more ordinary wanness had overspread the emaciated fingers through which trickled many passionate tears. The disease of the Lady Madeline had long baffled the skill of her physicians. A settled apathy, a gradual wasting away of the person, and frequent, although transient, affections of a partially cataleptical character. never heard that word, were the unusual diagnosis. Hitherto, she had steadily borne up against the pressure of her malady and had not betaken herself finally to bed, but on the closing of the evening of my arrival at the house, she succumbed, as her brother told me at night with inexpressible agitation, to the prostrating power of the destroyer, and I learned that the glimpse I had obtained of her person would thus probably be the last I should obtain, that the lady, at least while living, would be seen by me no more. For several days, enduring her name was unmentioned by either Usher or myself. During this period, I busied in earnest endeavors to alleviate the melancholy of my friend. We painted and read together, or I listened, as if in a dream, to the wild improvisations of his speaking guitar. And thus, as a closer and still closer intimacy admitted me more unreservedly into the recesses of his spirit, the more bitterly did I perceive the futility of all attempt at cheering a mind from which darkness, as if an inherent positive quality, poured forth upon all objects of the moral and physical universe in one unceasing radiation of gloom. Okay. I shall bear about me the memory of many solemn hours I thus spent. Oop, music stopped. Restart. There we go. Sorry about that. I'll start that over. I shall bear about me a memory of many solemn hours I thus spent alone with the master of the house of Usher. Yet I should fail in any attempt to convey an idea of the exact character of the studies or of the occupations in which he had involved me or led me the way. An excited and highly distempered ideality threw a sulphurous luster all over all. His long improvised dirges will ring forever in my ears. Among other things, I hold painfully in mind a certain singular perversion and amplification of the wild air of the last waltz of von Weber. From the paintings over which his elaborate fancy brooded, and which touch by touch into vagueness at which I shuddered, the more thrillingly, because I shuddered knowing not why. From these paintings, vivid as their images now are before me, I would in vain endeavor to educe more than a single portion which should lie within the compass of merely written words. By the utter simplicity, by the nakedness of his designs, he arrested and overwrought attention. If ever mortally painted an idea, if ever mortal painted an idea, the mortal was Roderick Usher. For me, at least, in the circumstances then surrounding me, there arose out of the purer abstractions which the hypochondriac contrived to throw upon his canvas an intensity of intolerable awe, no shadow of which I felt yet in the contemplation of the certainly growing yet too concrete reveries of Fuseli. One of the more phantasmagoric conceptions of my friend, partaking not so rigidly of the spirit of abstraction, may be shadowed forth, although feebly in words. A small picture presented the interior of immensely long and rectangular vault or tunnel with low walls, smooth, white, and without interruption or device. Certain accessory points of the design served well to convey the idea that the excavation lay at an exceeding depth below the surface of the earth. No outlet was observed in any portion of its vast extent, and no torch or other artificial source of light was discernible. Yet a flood of immense rays rolled through and bathed the whole in a ghastly and inappropriate splendor. I have spoken of the morbid condition of the authority nerve, which rendered all music intolerable to the sufferer, but with exception of certain effects of stringed instruments, it was perhaps the narrow limits to which he thus confined himself upon the guitar which gave birth in great measure to the fantastic character of his performances. The fervid facility of his impromptus could not be accounted for. They must have been and were in the notes as well as in the words of the wild in his wild fantasias, for not unfrequently accompanied himself with verbal or rhymed verbal improvisations. The result of that intense mental collectedness and concentration to which I have previously alluded as observable only in particular moments of the highest artificial excitement. The words of one of these rhapsodies I have easily remembered. I was, perhaps, the more forcibly impressed with it, as he gave it, because in the under or mystic current of its meaning, I fancied that I perceived, and for the first time, a full consciousness on the part of Usher, of the tottering of his lofty reason upon her throne. The verses, which were titled The Haunted Palace, ran very nearly, if not accurately, thus. In the greenest of our valleys, by good angels tenanted, once a fair and stately palace, radiant palace, reared its head. In the monarch thought's dominion, it stood there. Never seraph spread a pinion over fabric half so fair. Banners yellow, glorious golden, on its roof did float and flow. All this was in the olden time long ago. And every gentle air that dallied in this sweet day, along the ramparts, plumed and pallid, a winged odor went away. Wanders in the happy valley, through two luminous windows, saw spirits moving musically. To a lute's well-tuned law, round about a throne, while sitting in state his glory well befitting, the ruler of the realm was seen. And all with pearl and ruby glowing was the fair palace door, through which came flowing, and sparkling evermore, a troop of echoes whose sweet duty was but to sing, in voices of surpassing beauty, the wit and wisdom of their king. But evil things, in robes of sorrow, assailed the monarch's high estate. Ah, let us mourn, for never morrow shall dawn upon him desolate. And round about his home, the glory that blushed and bloomed is but a dim remembered story, of the old time entombed. The travelers now within the valley, through red-lidden windows, see vast forms that move fantastically to a discordant melody, while, like a rapid, ghastly river, through the pale door, a hideous throng rush forever and laugh, but smile no more. I will remember the suggestions arising from his ballad. Led us into a train of thought wherein there became manifest an opinion of Usher's, which I mention not so much on the account of its novelty, for other men have thought thus, as on account of the pertinacity with which he maintained it. This opinion, in its general form, was that of sentience of all vegetable things. But in his disordered fancy, the idea had assumed a more daring character and trespassed under certain conditions upon the kingdom of inorganization. I lack words to express the full extent or the earnest abandon of his persuasion. The belief, however, was connected, as I have previously hinted, with the gray stones of the home of his forefathers. The conditions of the sentience had been there, he imagined, fulfilled in the method of collocation of the stones, in the order of their arrangement, as well as in that of many fungi which overspread them, and of the decayed trees which stood around, above all in the long undisturbed endurance of this arrangement, and in its reduplication in the still waters of the tarn. Its evidence, the evidence of the sentience, was to be seen, he said, and here I stated as he spoke, in a gradual yet certain condensation of the atmosphere of their own about the waters and the walls. The result was discoverable, he added, in the silent yet inopportune and terrible influence which for centuries had molded the destinies of his family, and which made him what I now saw him, what he was. Such opinions need no comment, and I will make none. This part's going to be a little tough because there's a lot of, looks like Latin or French words, both. Our books, the books for which years had formed no small portion of the mental existence of the invalid, were, as we might be supposed, in strict keeping with this character of phantasm. We pored together over such works as the Vert de Chartreuse of Gresset, the Belphegor of Machiavelli, the Heaven and Hell of Swedenborg, the Subterranean Voyage of Nicholas Klim by Holberg, the Chiromancy of Robert Flood, of Jean d'Audegin, and of De la Chambre, the Journey into the Blue Distance by Tieck, and the City of the Sun of Campanella. One favorite volume was a small octavo edition of the Directorium Inquisitorium by the Dominican Emeric de Grauny, and there were passages in the Pomponius Mela about the old African satyrs and Agai pagans, Agipans, Agiapans? I don't know that word at all. Over which Usher would sit dreaming for hours. His chief delight, however, was found in the perusal of an exceedingly rare and curious book in the Quarto Gothic, the Manual of a Forgotten Church, the Vigiliae Mortuorum Sanctorum coram Elysia magnetinae. I could not help thinking of the wild ritual of his work and of its improbable influence upon the hypochondriac, when one evening, having informed me abruptly that Lady Madeline was no more, he started his intention of preserving her corpse for a fortnight, previously to its final interment, in one of the numerous vaults within the main walls of the building. The worldly reason, however, assigned for this singular proceeding was one which I did not feel at liberty to dispute. The brother had been led to resolution, so he told me, by consideration of the unusual character of his malady of the deceased, and of certain obtrusive and eager inquiries on the part of her medical men, and of the remote and exposed situation of the burial ground of the family. I will not deny that when I called to mind the sinister countenance of the person whom I met upon the staircase on the day of my arrival at the house, I had no desire to oppose what I regarded as, at best, but a harmless and by no means unnatural precaution. Whew. We're about halfway. At the request of Usher, I personally aided him in the arrangements of the temporary entombment, and the body having encoffined, we two alone bore it to its rest. The vault in which we placed it, and which had been so long unopened that our torches, half smothered in its oppressive atmosphere, gave us little opportunity for investigation, was a small, damp, and entirely without means of admission for light, lying at great depth immediately beneath a portion of the building in which had been my own sleeping apartment. It had been used, apparently, in remote feudal times for the worst purposes of a donjon keep, and in later days as a place for a deposit for powder, and for some other highly combustible substances as a portion of its floor, and the whole interior of the long archway through which we reached it were carefully sheathed with copper. The door of massive iron had been also similarly protected. Its intense weight caused an unnaturally sharp grating sound as it moved upon its hinges. Having deposited our mournful burden upon the trestles within this region of horror, we had partially turned aside the yet unscrewed lid of the coffin and looked upon the face of the tenant. A striking similitude between the brother and sister now arrested my attention, and Usher, divining, perhaps, my thoughts, murmured out some few words from which I learned that the deceased and himself had been twins, and the sympathies of a scarcely intelligible nature had always existed between them. Our glances, however, rested not long upon the dead, for we could not regard her unawed. The disease which had thus entombed the lady in the maturity of youth had left, as usual in all maladies of a strictly cataclysmical character, the mockery of a faint blush upon her bosom, and the face that now suspiciously lingering smile. Oh my gosh, I just lost my spot because I looked away for a second. That suspiciously lingering smile upon the lip which was so terrible in death. We replaced and screwed down the lid. Having secured the gate of iron, made our way with toil into the scarcely less gloomy apartments of the upper portion of the house. And now some days of blitter, I combined the two words there. And now some days of bitter grief having elapsed, an observable change came over the features of the mental disorder of my friend. His ordinary manner had vanished. His ordinary occupations were neglected or forgotten. He roamed from chamber to chamber with hurried, unequal, and objectless step. The pallor of his countenance had assumed, if possible, a more ghastly hue, but the luminance of his eye had utterly gone out. The once occasional huskiness of his tone was heard no more. With a tremulous quaver, as if of extreme terror, and habitually characterized his utterance. There were at times, indeed, when I thought his unceasingly agitated mind was laboring with some oppressive secret to divulge, which he struggled for the necessary courage. At times, again, I was obliged to resolve all into the merely inexplicable vagaries of madness, for I beheld him gazing upon vacancy for long hours, in an attitude of profoundest attention, as if listening to some imaginary sound. It was no wonder that his condition terrified, that it infected me. I felt creeping upon me by slow yet certain degrees the wild influences of his own fantastic yet impressive superstition. It was especially upon retiring to bed late in the night of the 7th or 8th day after placing Lady Madeline within the donjon that I experienced the full power of such feelings. Sleep came not near my couch. While the hours waned and waned away, I struggled to reason off the nervousness which had dominion over me. I endeavored to believe that much, if not all, of what I felt was due to bewildering influence of the gloomy furniture of the room, of the dark and tattered tapestries, which, tortured into motion by the breath of rising tempest, swayed fitfully to and fro upon the walls and rustled uneasily about the decorations of the bed. But my efforts were fruitless. An irrepressible tremor gradually pervaded my frame, and at length there sat upon my very heart an incubus of utterly causeless alarm. Shaking this off with a gasp and a struggle, I uplifted myself upon the pillows, and peering earnestly with the intense darkness of the chamber, hearkened. I know not why, except that an indistinct spirit prompted me to certain low and indefinite sounds which came, although the pauses of the storm at long intervals, I knew not whence. Overpowered by the intense sentiment of horror, unaccountable yet unendurable, I threw my clothes on with haste, for I felt I should sleep no more during the night, and endeavored to arouse myself to the pitiable condition into which I had fallen by pacing rapidly to and fro through the apartment. I had taken but a few turns in this manner when a light step on an adjoining staircase arrested my attention. I presently recognized it as that of Usher. In an instant afterward he rapped with a gentle touch upon my door, and I entered bearing a lamp. His countenance was, as usual, cadaverously wan, but moreover there was a species of mad hilarity in his eyes, an evidently restrained hysteria in his whole demeanor. His air appalled me, but anything was preferable to the solitude which I had so long endured, and I even welcomed the presence of his relief, or his presence as a relief. "Have you not seen it?" he said abruptly, after having stared about him for some moments of silence. You have not seen it, then? But stay, you shall." Thus speaking, and having carefully shaded his lamp, he hurried to one of the casements and threw it freely open to the storm. Wow, perfect time for the laughing part. I keep hunching over and I gotta not do that. The impetuous fury of the entering gust. It's perfect, the laughing, because it was just talking about his madness. The impetuous fury of the entering gust nearly lifted us from our feet. It was, indeed, a tempestuous yet sternly beautiful night, and one wildly singular in its terror and beauty. A whirlwind had apparently collected its force in our vicinity, and for there were frequent and violent alterations in the direction of the wind. The exceeding density of clouds, which hung so low as if to press upon the turrets of the house, did not prevent our perceiving the lifelike velocity with which they flew, careering from all points against each other, without passing away into the distance. I say that even their exceeding density did not prevent our perceiving this. Yet we had no glimpse of the moon or stars, nor was there any flashing forth of the lightning, but under surfaces of the huge masses of agitated vapor, as well as all terrestrial objects immediately around us, were glowing in an unnatural light of a faintly luminous and distinctly visible gaseous exhalation, which hung about and enshrouded the mansion. Oh, hey, Anti-Bolt. How are you doing? Just reading some Edgar Allan Poe. The Fall of the House of Usher, if you're just tuning in. We're getting there. Got a couple pages left. "You must not, you shall not behold this," said I, shuddering to Usher as I led him with a gentle violence from the window to a seat. "These appearances which bewilder you are merely electrical phenomena, not uncommon, or it may be that they have their ghastly origin in the rank miasma of the tarn. Let us close this casement. The air is chilling and dangerous to your frame. Here is one of your favorite romances. I will read, and you shall listen. So we will pass away this terrible night together." The antique volume, which I had taken up with the mad tryst of Sir Lancelot Canning, but I had called it a favorite of Usher's more in sad jest than in earnest, for in truth there is little in the uncouth and unimaginative proximity which I could have had interest for the lofty and spiritual ideality of my friend. It was, however, the only book immediately at hand. I indulged a vague hope that the excitement which now agitated the hypochondriac might find relief, for the history of mental disorder is full of similar anomalies. Even in the extremeness of the folly which I could read, could I have judged indeed by the wild, overstrained air of vivacity with which he hearkened, and apparently hearkened to the words of the tale, I might have congratulated myself upon the success of my design. I had arrived at the well-known portion of the story where Ethelred, the hero of Tryst, having sought in vain for peaceable admission into his dwelling of the hermit, into the dwelling of the hermit, proceeds to make good an entrance by force. Here it will be remembered that the words of the narrative run thus. And Ethelred, who was by nature of doughty heart, who was now mighty withal, on account of powerfulness of the wine which he had drunken, waited no longer to hold parley with the hermit, who, in sooth, was of obstinate and maliceful turn, but feeling the rain upon his shoulders, and fearing the rising of the tempest, uplifted his mace outright, and with blows made quickly room in the planking of the door for his gauntleted hand. And now pulling therewith sturdily, he so cracked and ripped and tore all asunder, that the noise of the dry and hollow-sounding wood alarmed and reverberated throughout the forest. At the termination of this sentence, I started for a moment, and for a moment paused, for it appeared to me, although I had at once concluded that my excited fancy had deceived me, it appeared to me that from some very remote portion of the mansion there came indistinctly to my ears what might have been, in its exact similarity of character, the echo, but a stifled and dull one certainly, of the very crackling and ripping sound which Sir Lancelot had so particularly described. It was, with beyond doubt, the coincidence alone which had arrested my attention, for amid the rattling of the sashes of the casements and the ordinary commingling noises of the still increasing storm, the sound in itself had nothing, surely, which should have interested or disturbed me. I continued the story. But the good champion Ethelred, now entering within the door, was sore enraged and amazed to perceive no signal of the maliceful hermit, but in the stead thereof a dragon of scaly and prodigious demeanor, of a fiery tongue, which sate in guard before a palace of gold, with a floor of silver. Upon the walls there hung a shield of shining brass, within the legend and written, "Who entereth herein a conqueror hath been, who slayeth dragon, the shield he shall win." And Ethelred uplifted his mace, and struck upon the head of the dragon, which fell before him, and gave up his pesty breath, had, with a shriek so horrid and harsh, and withal so piercing, that Ethelred had fain to close his ears with his hands against the dreadful noise of it, the like whereof was never before heard. Here again I paused abruptly, now with a feeling of wild amazement, that there could be no doubt whatever that in this instance I did actually hear, although from what direction it proceeded I found it impossible to say. A low and apparent distant... Damn it, it stopped again. There we go. Lost my spot. Appearing low distance, but a harsh, protracted, and the most unusual screaming or grating sound, the exact counterpart of what my fancy had already conjured up for the dragon's unnatural shriek, as described by the romancer. Oppressed as I certainly was upon the occurrence of this second and most extraordinary coincidence, by 1,000 conflicting sensations in which wonder and extreme terror were predominant, I still retained a sufficient presence of mind to avoid exciting, by any observation, the sensitive nervousness of my companion. I was by no means certain that he had noticed the sounds in questions, although assuredly a strange alteration had, during the last few minutes, taken place in his demeanor. Oh my god, I lost my spot. Notice my companion. Demeanor. Oh, from a position fronting my own, he had gradually brought around his chair so as to sit with his face to the door of the chamber, and thus I could partially perceive his features. I saw that his lips trembled as if he were murmuring inaudibly. His head dropped upon his breast. Yet I knew he was not sleeping. From the wide and rigid openings of his eyes, I caught a glance of it in the profile. The motion of his body, too, was at variance with the idea. He rocked from side to side with a gentle yet constant and uniform sway. Having rapidly taken notice of all this, I resumed the narratives of Sir Lancelot, and which thus proceeded. And now the champion, having escaped from the terrible fury of the dragon, bethinking himself of the brazen shield and of breaking up the enchantment which was upon it, removed the carcass out of the way before him, and approached valorously over the silver pavement to the castle, to where the shield was upon the wall, which in sooth tarried not for his fully coming, but fell down at his feet upon the silver floor with a mighty and great and terrible ringing sound. No sooner had these syllables passed my lips than, as if a shield of brass had indeed, at that moment, fallen heavily upon the floor of silver, I became aware in a distinct, hollow, and metallic, and clangorous, yet apparently muffled reverberation. Completely unnerved, I leapt to my feet, but the measured, rocking movement of Usher was undisturbed. I rushed to the chair in which he sat. His eyes were bent fixedly before me, although his whole countenance there reside a stony rigidity. But as I placed my hand upon his shoulder, there came a strong shudder over his whole person. A sickly smile quivered about his lips, and I saw that he spoke in a low, hurried, and gibbering murmur, as if unconscious in my presence. Bending closely over him, I at length drank in the hideous import of his words. Not hear it? Yes, I hear it, and have heard it. Long, 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 many minutes, many hours, many days, I have heard it. Yet I dared not. Oh, pity me, miserable wretch that I am. I dared not speak. We have put her living in the tomb. Said I not that my senses were acute? I now tell you that I heard her first feeble movements in the hollow coffin. I heard them many days ago, yet I dared not speak. And now tonight, Ethelred, the breaking of the hermit's door, the death cry of the dragon, and the clangor of the shield, say rather the rendering of her coffin, and the grating of the iron hinges of her prison, and the struggles within the coppered archway of the vault. Or whither shall I fly? Will she not be here anon? Is she not hurrying to upbraid me for my haste? Have I not heard her footsteps on the stair? Do I not distinguish that heavy, horrible beating of her heart? Madman! Here he sprang fervorously to his feet and shrieked out the syllables as if in the effort he was giving up his soul. Madman! I tell you that she now stands without the door. As if with superhuman energy of his utterance, there had been found the potency of a spell. The huge antique panels to which the speaker pointed threw slowly back upon the instant their ponderous and ebony jaws. It was the work of the rushing gust, but then without those doors there did stand a lofty and enshrouded figure of Lady Madeline of Usher. There was blood upon her white robes, and the evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her emaciated frame. For a moment she remained trembling and reeling to and fro upon the threshold, then, with a low moaning cry, fell heavily inward upon the person of her brother, and in violent and now final death agonies bore him to the ground, a corpse, a victim to the terrors he had anticipated. From that chamber and from that mansion I fled aghast. The storm had still abroad. In all its wrath, I found myself crossing the old causeway. Suddenly there shot along the path a wild light, and I turned to see whence a gleam so unusual could have been issued. The vast house and its shadows were alone behind me. The radiance was that of a full setting and a blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through that once barely discernible fissure, of which I had before spoken as extending from the roof of the building in a zigzag direction to the base. While I gazed, the fissure rapidly widened. There came a fierce breath of a whirlwind. The entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight. My brain reeled as I saw the mighty walls rushing asunder. There was a long, tumultuous shouting like a voice of 1,000 waters, and the deep, dank tarn at my feet closed suddenly and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher. And that is Fall of the House of Usher. That one was a lot harder to read, but I enjoyed that one. It's a good story, I think. I apologize to anybody listening, watching, for any butchering of the words. Oh, have a good day at work, Annie Bolt. Take care. But I do apologize for butchering a lot of words, because I know I did. I knows that I did. But yeah, I think that about does it for this one. And I'm gonna try to come up with like a more regular schedule to do some of these readings on. I'm also uploading them to YouTube, so if you're interested, it's Reedy Bravo 912. I have the other one posted up there already. The other one I read, The Cask of Amontillado, is posted on my YouTube already, so if you missed that or you want to listen to me read it again, you can go check that out. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, you know, all that fun stuff. And if you liked what you watched on Twitch, feel free to follow me or subscribe, or even just say hi. I'm on Twitter a lot, and that's probably the best place to find my kind of schedule. Also, have a Discord here. Just put it in the chat. If you're interested in joining the Discord, just let me know. Go ahead and click the link there if you'd like. Also, maybe this one would be better. I have a link tree with all the links to all the social medias and platforms that I use. And thanks for... Yeah, we playing Wick today. Get out of here with that nonsense. That game was... Watching you play it was terrifying. I'm not playing Wick. There's no way. I think that's about it for today. Unfortunately, you just missed the whole reading of The Fall of the House of Usher. Might stream again later, but it'll probably be games. Not sure what yet. Been trying to figure out what to do. Oh, I just finished reading. Oh, hi Nightingale. I just read Fall of the House of Usher. I will be uploading it to my YouTube. Same username if you're interested. Actually, maybe let me check the book real quick for something short. Okay, oh, I can read one of his poems. The Valley of Unrest. Once it smiled a silent dell where the people did not dwell. They had gone unto the wars, trusting to the mid-eyed stars, nightly from azure towers, to keep watch above the flowers, in the midst of which all day the red sunlight lazy lay. Now each visitor shall confess the sad valley's restlessness. Nothing there is motionless. Nothing saves the air that brood over the magic solitude. Ah, by no wind are stirred those trees that palpitate like the chill seas. Around the misty Hebrides. Sorry. Ah, by no wind those clouds are driven, that rustle through the unquiet heaven, uneasily from morn till evening. In the myriads of the human eye, over lilies that wave and weep upon a nameless grave, they wave from out their fragrant tops, eternal dew comes down in drops. They weep from their delicate stems, perennial tears descend in gems. That was Valley of the Unrest. That was kind of fun. I guess I can do that, read some of the shorter poems. But, don't forget you can't upload to other platforms. Oh, I didn't realize that. Yikes, I did that last time. Alright, I'll upload this tomorrow. It'll be on my YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, hi tomorrow. But thanks for coming by, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed Reedy Reads, I think is what I'm calling these segments. If I can find more stuff in the public domain to read, I will absolutely do that. So, thanks for coming by, and I appreciate you all. You're all awesome. Pointing. Take care, everybody. I hope you all have a great day and an awesome spooky season.